Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with our good friend Jeff Crosby. Jeff is the president of ECPA, the Trade Association of Christian Publishing, and has worked in bookselling and publishing roles for more than 4 decades. Jeff's new book is titled World of Wonders, A Spirituality of Reading. And previously we interviewed Jeff for his book, The Language of the Soul, Meeting God in the Longings of Our Hearts. Additional written work has been published in Publishers Weekly, Books and Culture, Crux Journal, Conversations Journal, Living Lutheran, Marriage Partnership, CRA Today, and Urban Faith. Among cherished volumes on his personal library shelf of honor, you would find books by Dostoevsky, John Steinbeck, Maya Angelou, Kent Harif, Marilyn McIntyre, Frederick Buechner, Brendan Manning, Philip Yancey, and Lucy Shaw. In my early days of publishing conferences and writing workshops with either Frederick Buechner or Writing for Your Life or Publishing in Color, Jeff was extremely helpful in introducing me to many important people within the Christian publishing industry, and I've always been very appreciative of that. Jeff also presented it at all three of those different conference series, Buechner, Writing for Your Life, and Publishing in Color, which I greatly appreciated as well. Jeff resides in the Chicago area with his wife, Cindy Crosby, and you can learn more about Jeff and all his work at jeffreycrosby.net. Jeff, it's wonderful to speak with you as always, and so many congratulations on all of your great work.
It's great to be with you again, Brian. Thanks for that lovely introduction.
So, uh, anything else that you'd like people to know about you besides what I kind of touched on there?
Well, you already given a mouthful. I think the only other thing, I'm also a grandfather to six grandkids, and so I have the joy now of this reading life, not only of my own and with my wife, but also the wonder of reading to small children again. So that's probably the only other thing.
I
Absolutely
can,
love reading books to my grandkids.
I can hear you on that one, for sure. So before we talk about books, though, what's the latest with ECPA? What's kind of the latest and greatest there?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we're a trade association for those who don't know ECPA of Christian Publishing. There are a couple of sister trade associations doing similar things, but with some distinctives. ECPA was founded in 1974, and in many ways, at age 51, we're still doing much of what we did back then. You know, we're gathering a community of publishers together in the belief that uh, this idea of being together and sharing intelligence and community and support with one another helps us all be stronger. And I mean, unique things we're doing, I suppose, are some really cool initiatives with emerging leaders trying to raise up young leaders within publishing houses and particularly underserved communities. A open doors program where we're hosting interns and often interns of color, although not only. And we do a 4 to 5 week introduction to Christian publishing to them every summer. I think we're in our 5th year of doing that now. So those are some new things I'm really deriving a great deal of joy out of. It's good to get young people in and both invest in them and also listen to what are their questions, what are their hopes, what are their worries about a career in Christian publishing, and so that's been a lot of fun.
How is the book publishing industry going overall?
Overall, the publishing, not specifically to religion or Christian publishing, is kind of flat, and it has been for a while. Right at the end of COVID, or the end of 2020 and then into 21, it kind of it kind of took off again, like growth that we hadn't seen in quite a while. And I think that's a lot of people had transitioned to their homes. Maybe they had a little more time reading, or they were instructing their children when schools were closed. Don't know all the reasons why, but end of 20 into 21, publishing it overall grew, but it's flattened out since. Religion publishing is growing by, depends on who you ask, between 3 and 7%, and a lot of that is Bible sales. Bible sales
Hmm.
have just gone through the roof, and again, a lot of different theories of why. But the Wall Street Journal, Christian Post, New York Times, and others have done stories about this peculiar reality of Bible sales taking off, and what does that mean? Why are so many selling? Christian books apart from the Bible are closer to that flat realm of the general trade. But overall, we're encouraged. People are still reading. They're still reading print books, and now increasingly they're streaming or listening to audiobooks, and the quality of audiobooks have just improved so much. Digital books, ebooks on Kindles are holding at about 15%. Depends on the category of book, but about 15%. So the 2008, 2009 worry that ebooks were going to mean the Gutenberg elegy, the end of the printed book, didn't come to pass. But all three formats, along with other special things that are happening to make reading accessible to those who have visual impairment and in other ways, it's pretty exciting. So I think it's a good time to be in publishing.
It always is, right? It's always a good time to be associated with books in one way or the other.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for all the work that you've done, there at ECPA and several other important places.
Yeah.
So before we get into your new book, I'd like you to share to our newer viewers a little bit about The Language of the Soul that I mentioned earlier, that we did
Yeah.
an interview on that. And I've taken, several excerpts of that book to put on our blogs.
Yeah.
But tell folks about that, please.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a book that really grew out of about a 15-year experience of journaling about pondering the longings of my own heart, the longings for, freedom from fear and anxiety, the longings for friendship, the longing for a transformed life, and others. It was published in the spring of 2024, I believe,
Mhm.
by Broadleaf Books. And it was one that I don't know if I told you when we talked before about the book, but Phyllis Tickle, who many, I'm guessing in your community have heard of or perhaps knew. But in 2008, she and I were having coffee together at a book event, and I shared what I had been working on and what I'd been writing. And it was this book. At the time, it was a Portuguese word called saudade, which in English kind of means longing, although it's not a direct equivalent. And Phyllis looked me in the eye and she said, "It's about time that you wrote that, get going." It only took me another 15 years or so to make it happen. But yeah, it was great fun. Loved working with Broadleaf Books on that. A lot of conversations with people. A number of churches asked me to speak or be a part of actually Lenten retreats, which was interesting. I hadn't really thought of the book that way, but so a little bit of traveling around, a lot of podcasts, a lot of conversations with readers, which has been really gratifying. I think that we all carry longings in our heart. The question is whether or not we're in touch with them, and once we are, what do we do with them? And importantly, what I try to do in the book is show the ways in which, at least in my case, God met me in the midst of it. Doesn't mean that God, solved or allowed me to set aside those longings. They're all still very, very resident, but met me in the midst of them. So
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
that was
No, it
all
was
about.
a really meaningful book.
Thank you.
Thank you for persevering
Yeah.
to make it happen.
Yeah. This new one, The World of Wonders, didn't take 15 years.
Oh, good, good.
Right. So I'm glad for that.
Well, just a side note, I was fortunate enough to hear Phyllis speak at a conference,
Yeah.
and I actually had lunch with her one day, and I just picked up the book that John Sweeney, the biography of Phyllis Tickle that he wrote. So I'm looking forward to reading that.
I just got a copy out of my library last night. I hadn't read it
Uh,
yet either, but looking forward to it.
yeah, same here, same here. All right, so let's get to the new book. As I mentioned, the title is World of Wonders, a spirituality of reading. How did that book come about?
Yeah, it really came about as a byproduct of 40 now, 2 years. September 9th was I crossed over into the 43rd year of work in this world of publishing and bookselling. Um, so I think, in some ways, Brian, the book may have it may be like an apologetic for why would someone, I've actually had this question, why would you, I think it was Kathy Lynn Grossman of Publishers Week, why would you spend virtually all of your adult life in this singular work of bookselling and publishing? And I think the book is in some ways an answer to that. It is, and I felt like I needed to write it while I was still actively working
Mhm.
in this so-called industry. Though I'm not directly a publisher anymore, ECPA serves, 100 or so publishers in the US and around the world. And so I felt like it was time for me, to get cracking on answering that question. Why have I spent um, my whole life in this singular industry? But a secondary motivation, I suppose, is that I want to meet people wherever they are on the spectrum of being just an occasional reader or like one of my brothers virtually never read a book to the other end of the spectrum, like a voracious reader, reading every day, reading multiple books at once, wherever the reader is on that spectrum. I wanted to offer something that met them where they were, and then perhaps, pulled them, particularly those who don't read often, pulled them along that spectrum just a little bit, because I firmly believe that reading, the act of reading, the discipline of reading, it's a gateway to transformation. I have seen it in my own life. I've seen it in your life. I heard Buechner at various times when he talked about books and the idea of reading. The ideas contained in reading. I mean, Buechner was a huge proponent of the uh, the primacy of reading scripture, yes, but also reading beyond that. And so I think a little bit of an apologetic for why have I done what I've done, and then secondly, an encouragement wherever people are along the way, including if you're that voracious reader, you're going to encounter every chapter. I believe it's a list of 15 books. You're going to encounter what I believe to be some of the best books representing the content in each of the chapters. And so I hope that you, as a reader, will find some new gems, things that you've overlooked, or maybe a genre of reading that you have overlooked, and you'll be stimulated to begin to read poetry or read it again or read memoir or read diverse voices or read fiction. So that's where it came from, and
Interesting.
it's
Interesting.
it's just coming out now. So I'm just beginning to hear from some of the early readers, and it's been fun to see what kinds of things it's stirring up.
Well, your recommended reading lists really were amazing, and certainly did introduce me to books that I had, never
Good.
been
That's
familiar with.
awesome.
And, I've got this long wish list online of, books to order, so
Right.
I'll struggle to get to some of them. But anyway, um, so I have to, since you mentioned, Frederick Buechner, I have to ask
Yeah.
you about what you included in the book, about him.
Yeah, well, I know for sure that I included in there's a chapter on reading memoir. And I am absolutely confident, though you may go back and check me on this, Brian, that two of the 15 recommended books were memoirs of his. Sacred Journey, which was the first of kind of a trilogy, with Now and Then being in the middle, and Telling Secrets being the third, and Telling Secrets, I'm pretty confident was also in there. Those were two of his works that Sacred Journey probably was the first thing of his I ever read, and it completely um, just upended me. I mean, his story of his father's death by suicide, and then Telling Secrets, some things within his family system. The middle now and then, which I don't think I recommended, though I love it. I just couldn't have. I could have had 15,
Well, that's the thing.
Beekner.
Exactly.
Yeah, but those two, Telling Secrets and
Yeah,
Sacred Journey, are there. And I think the other thing that I may have pulled in the chapter on reading scripture, he had some interesting
yeah.
things to say in wishful thinking about reading, modern languages at a time when that was, a lot of people were critical of that. Modern languages at the point of wishful thinking's publication date were a bit controversial, and they weren't to Buechner. He said, read something you can actually understand, and also read with a commentary, alongside. And so I think those are the places he appeared. He could have appeared others, but
I
those are
think there
the
were I
places.
think there were a couple of those, but I don't remember the
Yeah,
specifics either. But anyway, we both have this incredible respect for his work, and so it's
absolutely.
always a pleasure to see you and other people acknowledge that. And
Yeah.
uh,
Well, and I think it was Fred Buechner that drew you and I together
yeah,
initially. So
absolutely.
that's another soft spot about him and his work.
So your book has a very interesting structure,
Yeah.
consisting of 12 chapters written by you, followed by short reflections written by 12 different authors. So why did you choose that approach?
Yeah, at the end of every chapter, you're right. I did invite other writers, most of whom are better known than me. So the chapter on Lucy on poetry, Lucy Shaw, I invited her. A chapter on memoir, I think I invited Ben Patterson. And I can't recall where what all the others are, but I really wanted to give space to. I think it's a matter of voice. Like every writer has a voice of his or her own. But by doing that, I was injecting other voices and kind of other lenses into the manuscript. And just working as long as I have in this field, I've gotten to know a lot of people. So I
Yes,
just reached out. Ed
absolutely.
Gilbreth on the chapter on diversity,
Yeah,
reading diverse voices, I believe. I just reached out to different people and said, hey, this is a project I'm working on, and I'd love to give up a little bit of space at the end of every chapter for someone to talk about how books had impacted them, and particularly whatever subject matter we were dealing with. So each of the 12 who were they're reflecting on what I've written and adding their own perspective about why reading poetry is important, right? Why reading diverse voices, or how to read as a spiritual discipline and things like that. So I think it's just an invitation to friends in publishing, to many of them on the later career side, not all of them, but many of them, to add their voices, and also kind of a way to honor, because in all 12 cases, even one that I've known only more recently, the chapter on grief and loss, was a woman who I've not known that long, but whose work has really impacted me, and it was a way to kind of honor them and their work and what they've meant
Mm,
to
mm,
to me and to my reading life. So
mm.
hopefully it works.
It's wonderful, yeah.
It was a little different approach.
So you mentioned the book that you've had a disciplined reading of female authors, and you've got similar perspective on books written by authors of color and other
Yeah.
diverse backgrounds. Can you share with us a little bit about why you feel that's important?
In my work as a publisher, a longtime publisher at InterVarsity Press, and as bookseller near the Indiana University campus before that, and even in these last 5 years at ECPA, I'm surprised by how often, particularly I hear, sadly, men say, I don't really read female authors.
Hmm. Wow.
And, I mean, it's not as though they're saying it proudly, like, oh, yeah, I would never do that. It's just, they're acknowledging, like if I ask, hey, have you read Barbara Brown Taylor's latest book? They will say, no, I don't read a lot of female authors. And so I wanted to challenge that, and I wanted to model a different way. And similarly with authors of color, it's easy for us to, I mean, you and I love Buechner. It would be easy for us just to keep reading or rereading, his books. He has two shelves sitting over here. I mean, we could fill a year of reading, but just the importance of reading people whose life experiences are so different from ours, whose questions, whose trials, uh, whose stories are different. I just think it creates empathy. It creates understanding. It helps us bridge differences. And I mean, an example, I just read a book by a New Zealand Prime Minister,
Hmm.
Jacinda Ardern, and probably triggered in part by, for IVP, I used to go to New Zealand for part of
Hmm.
my work, and I loved the country. But, here's a prime minister from a country on the other side of the world, and yet I learned so much from reading her memoir. How did she get to
Hmm.
become the
Hmm.
prime minister? She became well known through COVID when New Zealand had
Yeah.
probably the most restrictive, border control and the lowest rate of incident of death for per capita. And I was just curious about her. I mean, that would be an example of both reading a woman, but also a diverse perspective, reading a book by someone from the other side of the world. And I think it broadens our understanding of humanity. It broadens our understanding of the world. It throws the sash of the window wide open and helps us encounter wonder, and also challenge. And how did people meet that? So that would be my argument. I just
Yeah,
think if
well, I
we
mean,
only read books by if we men only read books by men and vice versa, um, I think we're shortchanging ourselves.
yeah, I mean, it's quite frankly crazy. But for me, the major reason why I read is to learn, and
Yeah.
that's the reason why I want to hear from other people who are not like me, don't have backgrounds like me, and that's how I can learn. So
Yes.
um, I think it's extremely important.
Absolutely.
So you also, have these recommended reading lists, and
Yeah.
you want to share, some of the books from from those?
Oh my, get to do that. Thank you. That's great. Let's see. Um, well, we'll take reading memoir. So there are 15 recommendations, I think, in almost every chapter, if not all. And I say here below is a list of seminal books in the memoir genre. Some are written from a perspective of Christian faith, one from a Jewish point of view. All of them have a poignant story to tell. And among the memoirs recommended at the end of that chapter are Telling Secrets. We already mentioned that, and Sacred Journey by Frederick Buechner. But Between Two Trailers by J. Dana Trent, incredible memoir published last year by Convergent Books. If you haven't read it, Brian, you must pick up Between Two Trailers. I Know Why a Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. Surprised by Joy by C.S. Lewis. Where the Light Fell by Philip Yancey. Very impactful book. You Could Make This Place Beautiful by the writer Maggie Smith. Very
That
powerful.
one I'm not familiar with.
No Cure for Being Human and Other Truths I Needed to Hear by Kate Bowler. I know
Oh, yeah.
you know her work. Walking with the Wind by the great civil rights leader and congressperson John Lewis. The Shaping of a Life, A Spiritual Landscape by Phyllis Tickle. Surprised by Oxford by Carolyn Weber, the woman who wrote the foreword to World of Wonders. All Rivers Run to the Sea by Elie Wiesel. All Is Grace by Brennan Manning. The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, All My Knotted Up Life by Beth Moore, and The Sacred Journey by Buechner. So that would be an example. And my hope is that as you encounter that list of 15, that there's something that perks your interest. I would have loved to have annotated each of them, but
Mm.
it would have taken too much space
Too
within the
much.
book. So I may do that online, may
I think
post
that's a
that.
really good idea, or a study guide or something like that that would have, accompany the book or whatever. But yeah, I think that would be very useful, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So you also have a section on the seasons of family life and a recommended list, associated with that. Can you talk about what you mean by that a little bit?
Yeah, so in the reading, so the last third you mentioned the structure. The last third of the structure is reading in seasons of life, and one of them is seasons of family life. So I go back and um, tell some stories of reading to my kids when they were really little, and the reading list includes some children's books like the Chronicles of Narnia or the Lord of the Rings, and then a series called Adam Raccoon that they loved, and now my grandchildren are exposed to on a regular basis. But reading to children isn't the only season of family life. There's reading, to meet the challenges of teen years, or the one I'm in right now, reading in the season of caring for a parent with dementia.
Mm.
Our family life has rhythms and ebbs and flows and seasons. And in that chapter, I'm trying to address that reality.
Mm.
And how can we maintain a reading life throughout all of the seasons, and even as we age, even as we ourselves, perhaps through vision or memory or other reasons, it becomes more difficult for us to read. And so, yeah, some of the books recommended in that chapter are things that I have literally been reading, even in the last week, about caring well for aging parents who are facing, end of life concerns. So, yeah, from cradle to grave, and that is part of the idea of the entire book, that um, we can read to others and read on our own. I tell a story in one of the chapters about a woman in a nursing home named Hattie Driscoll. In fact, that's probably what more people have asked me about, is Hattie. They say, I want to know Hattie. She was, late 80s. It, at the time, I was leading a worship service, playing guitar and doing little homilies at a nursing home where we lived in Indiana. And Hattie was one of the residents, and she looked like a female Mr. Rogers with she always had a cardigan sweater, and she would walk very slowly out, to the service, and she would always have a book in her hand, a book that she had been reading, and a book she was absolutely convinced I needed to read. And for probably 3 years, I think we did that. And
Wow.
Hattie never failed she would invite me back, and my children and my wife, she would invite us back to her room, and she would have that book for us. And then when I would come back the next month, it was a service once a month. She would say, "Did you read it? What did you learn?" And
Wow.
so, and then one day Hattie was gone.
Right.
And, but so I tell that story. And some people have said, when I grow up, I want to be like Hattie. And I kind of do too.
Yeah, so am I. So, what would you suggest for people who don't really have, discipline of spiritual reading? How can they form one?
That's a great question. I'm sure the pathway is super individual, but what I would suggest is, find a time of day that works for you. It could be early morning. I'm an early riser, and I read a lot in the morning, and I also read a lot late at night. Doesn't mean I don't read in between, but those are kind of my times. I just know to set aside time before my workday begins, and then at the end. I have the privilege of being married to a spouse who is a more voracious reader even than I. So I realize that's not always the case for
Yeah.
people. So just find the time of day that works, and also the place. I think that maybe you have a certain chair, or maybe you go to a
Oh,
coffee
yeah.
shop, and there's something about a place that is almost a ritual. Like your brain knows, when I go to that chair, That's my reading chair. I imagine, I imagine Buechner in that room in his
Yes,
house in
yes.
Vermont,
Magic Kingdom.
Exactly. Or Lewis's the chair in C.S. Lewis's Kilns in Oxford. But find a place, find a time, and find a genre that, just don't worry about whether it's a Christian book or, religious book of any kind. Just find something that kind of sparks your imagination and begin there. And I also find that being curious about what other people are reading. I'm never with people without popping the question, what are you reading that you're recommending? And so striking up in your friendships, questions like that, and if someone shares something that kind of kindles your interest or your imagination, check it out of the library, and give it a try. But also be willing. I'm format agnostic. Be willing to listen to audiobooks in the car
Mhm.
if that's a better place for you to listen. Spotify now has all kinds of audiobooks, and the quality of the production, the narrators is so much better than they used to be.
Hmm.
Or if reading the Kindle on a long flight to Europe or something like that is your place, that's all fine too. But I would say, start there, enter in, have these, this world of wonders, windows opened up for you, and just keep moving in that direction. And I think that you'll eventually get there, where reading is as important as it is to me.
Just a personal side note, one of
Yeah.
the wisest thing my wife and I ever did was enclose our porch to be screened
Yeah.
in. And we each have comfortable chairs out there that we read in like crazy. That's our place. So I
Yeah.
get so upset when the weather gets so cold that, it's not comfortable to be out there. I even bought a little portable heater so that we could extend our season, out there. It's that important. But we still have to move
That's
inside eventually. So
okay. Well, New Jersey's it's reasonably warm most of the year, so
yeah, we
you
get
get
quite a
to
few months.
yeah, that's good for you. I'm glad you did that.
So, what would you most like readers to take away from the book?
Oh, just to be inspired wherever you are on that spectrum, to be inspired to continue and to try to broaden the breadth of what you're reading, what you expose yourself to, find voices that are quite different from your own, and just lean into those, learn from them, like you were saying, and then tell others about it. The poet Mary Oliver has a phrase that's sort of my wife's mantra, like, um, pay attention, be
Mhm.
astonished, tell others about it. And in a similar way to what Oliver is talking about the natural world, be astonished, pay attention, be astonished, tell others. I think in a similar way, as you read, as you're astonished by something that you're reading, tell others about it. But it all starts with being attentive to what is your reading sort of kindling in your own soul. That to go back to the first question you asked me about the language of the soul. I mean, that book literally arose out of being attentive
Mm, mm.
uh, to both pain and hope, resident in my own soul, in my own spirit. And I think reading helps us do that. So that's my hope.
Go
If it
read.
hasn't done it for you before, that it will do it in the future.
Good, good, good. So I know you're in the midst of launching a new book, but I have to ask, are there any other projects, whether it's books or something else that you can tell us
Yeah.
about?
Well, there is one other. It should be published next year by Rowman and Littlefield Publishers, a part of the Bloomsbury Press. When I moved out of publishing in 2021, I carried three books with me. The Language of the Soul. That was the first one. Phyllis Tickle said, it's about time you wrote it, and I finally did. And then I carried this book on reading. I didn't know what it would be called, but what has become World of Wonders. And then the third one is kind of a big departure. It's a book on music, but
Hmm.
if I know you've read The Language of the Soul, you know that I say, even though I've been in the world of publishing all of my adult life, music is the language of my soul. And so the third book I carried away when I left the work of publishing. It has become, the working title anyway, is The Spirit in the Sky. Uh, the power of music in our search for Graceland. And it has 17 chapters. It starts with Paul Simon and it ends with Marvin Gaye. And in between, there are people like Van Morrison or Tracy Chapman, the Bill Withers, the Staple Singers, the Beatles, but a special emphasis on George Harrison, Cat Stevens, Bob Dylan, and then some lesser known artists. I didn't want the reader to pick up the table of contents and say, oh, I already know everything I need to know about those. So there's an artist named Judy Sill, who was the first musician signed to Asylum Records by David Geffen before the Eagles, before
Wow.
Jackson Brown. Judy Sill had two records and they're just incredible. But all of these artists, there's a spirituality that infused them either in a very overt way or a subtle way, and that's what I'm delving into is the power of this music, and in my search for Graceland, which is a play on the Paul Simon album, of course, but also in a much broader, conception. So the George Harrison song "My Sweet Lord" or Van Morrison, "Whenever God Shines His Light." I mean, there's overt and then there's subtle, and so it's with the editor right now, and supposedly will come out sometime in 26, and that's all I know for right now. That may be all there is. I'm not sure, Brian.
Well, please keep us posted on that one. I mean, that
I
sounds like a
will.
very interesting conversation, which I know I won't be able to avoid asking you about some of the other, artists or songs that are not in your
The,
book to get your, feelings on those. But anyway, we'll wait.
no, there were a half dozen artists that got put on the cutting room floor that
Sure.
but maybe there will be a volume two someday.
Well, good. There you go. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom, your work, your passion, your spirituality. Again, the book is World of Wonders, a spirituality of reading. Check out Jeff's website, jeffreycrosby.net. Jeff, thanks so much again.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Good to be with you. Take care.